I won't walk away too far. This is actually a step back in history because it's kind of 20 years on since the Topic Climate project, and so I apologise for the garish colour of some of the slides, but I've actually picked up some of the original ones we did 20 years ago, and tried to put them together on that kind of side of things. And I'll go through and we'll pop out some of the stories, but it's really important to look at the genesis of why that project was kind of set up at the time, and then I'm looking at some of the future kind of things that we'll head through. And this is one of the many animals we came across at the time. I think it's possibly a shot that Nathan would have taken at the time. We saw some other kind of animals do some other things to our trucks at different times. So yeah, this project was really, it initiated in the mid-1990s, and it's really interesting to look back. This is a slide done at the time there of some of the kind of threats to the community and why this project kind of came about. And it's actually not too far off of the regional kind of debates, regional investment debates we're having at the moment and on that kind of side of things. But it was really around this kind of worrying concern about the kind of rural decline, the decline of the the rural economy, and a loss of skills, loss of people moving on, all that kind of side of things. So what Southland kind of took and set up, this is before obviously I arrived here, was they called an integrated rural economic development approach, and one key component of this was crops for Southland, and this was looking at alternative crops for the Southland region, alternative land use options, and we've seen the modern evolution of that today in terms of where Landcorp is going and things, but Southland had a crack at this 20 years ago, and sitting underneath that kind of crops for Southland kind of umbrella was three kind of initiatives. One's Topic Climate South, which we'll talk about today, which was quantifying the resources in Southland. The other one was alternative crops, and they had demonstration sites and tried different crops on that side of things. And then they saw the other platform as the extension side of things. And that was the Topic Climate Services, which is kind of carried through, and Nick Round-Turner, who's over here today in Venture Southland, but also Environment Southland, has carried through over the last 20 years in the use of that data. The other, a real unique thing was it was funded by the local councils, which is, I haven't seen a kind of particularly in a base resource or land resource assessment being funded out of actual local communities and councils here. So all the councils put in money, underpinned by the community trust, and then it happened to, I suppose, luck at the time, because it was pretty thin on the wire in terms of the resources we had. It coincided with a regional economic development initiative that the incoming Labour government wanted to do, and they split 50% of the cost at the time. Some of the crops they were looking at the time through there's meadow foam. It was a kind of an alternative energy crop. Peony roses, high value kind of rose exports and that kind of stuff. These were being grown down here by innovative kind of, I suppose, farmers or smallholders at the time, and then wasabi. And so those, and there's a whole range of them, I won't go through them all, but anyway, these are some of them. There's a booklet they produced around cool climate flowers, trying to get that up underway, straight export of flowers overseas, outside of my space, but this is the drivers for why I was kind of brought in at the time. We were given the kind of directive to map the soil resources, but also some climate kind of mapping in a three-year period. And so you can see there each year we kind of mapped out different blocks through there. And so that was our job, to go through, quantify the soil resources, produce soil maps and data and pass it on. So if I zoom into one of the areas, I'll show you a little case study we did at the time, I suppose, to justify our existence. That was done. This is the Winton Matara area, Winton up the top there, and Invercargill's just down here on that sense. And around 42,000 hectares. We split it up amongst a team of people, had different people going at the time, so Jim might have worked in one area, Nathan another, me in another area on that kind of side of things. So if we look at this area down the bottom here, 3,500 hectares, that was, I'll take the glory, that was me. My job to go in there and map that at the time. Started off with base kind of like the 1968 soil map, very little that we knew, or anyone knew about those soils, and they extended over vast areas. Kind of did a lot of augers in our trucks across that area, quite detailed, described some basic kind of soil properties, got a picture for the spatial distribution, the variation that's there. Then went back through and dug holes and described the soils and measured things. So we identified the variation that was there, and then went back into and characterised it. And my big regret, which I'll do my major public apology at this moment in time, is we did not measure the soil water holding capacity of those soils. I led the project, so I take the responsibility on that. too young in that sense. We mention it. It wasn't on the radar screen as being significantly important at the time. This environmental thing which governs all of our concerns nowadays. And it costs a lot of money to do it. So it didn't argue the point as I would nowadays, which I'm going to argue soon. I'll argue very strongly it's a key thing we need to measure. So my bigger public apology at the time there. We dug the holes and we did the measurements, but got persuaded by other arguments. From that, you construct a soil map, and so we identified roughly. Started off with 5 soils and ended up identifying 20 different soils in that area through there, and a whole lot more soil units and soil map units, and measured a lot of parameters, other parameters that ended up going through into information sheets and fact sheets and things like that. The other thing that was mapped at the time was the microclimates. So a broad scale map. This led through to the virtual climate network that people lead that nowadays, and on that kind of side of things. They put out temperature sensors across the Southland region for a year, and then used kind of modelling to extrapolate that out for 30 years. Based on that, they came up with growing degree day maps, so the variation in temperature across the region. And so some of this information we used, in this case they were looking for alternative locations for bulb crops or other crops and feeding through, because bulbs have been established in Southland for a number of years. And so that there was interpretations being able to be done on this and other crops. At that stage, there was some interest in environmental risks, and we started to pick up some of and tried to promote some of the differences between, in this case, winter grazing back then on a perch clay pallet compared to a well-drained soil, and the consequences that would go through on that. So we were starting to try and do some of those conversations at the time, but it wasn't our primary driver of why we were there. We were there to identify the soils, map them for this alternative crop. That's what the driver was. Interesting, there's a lot of interest in honeybees, and I found this slide in there. There was people using the data to identify locations for better places to locate their honeybees to increase productivity at the time, and honey's now a really popular thing, but 20 years ago this data was being used for that. So at the end of the 3 years, look back, what did we achieve on that kind of side of things? Mapped 800,000 hectares over that three years. There were 70 different kind of soil maps that were produced, and all paper soil maps were sent out to all the farmers that participated, because it wasn't, GIS was coming in on those days, it wasn't all web based, it was very much paper based. Did 40 odd thousand kind of holes in the ground, so hopefully not too many animals broke their legs in those, but yep, and most of our backs are a bit knackered now. Over 680 soil profiles, and that data still sits there today. It's measured and it sits in the data sets. A whole lot of temperature records. Most importantly, we got the project done on time and on budget, which doesn't always happen, I know, particularly being a scientist on that sense. But yeah, it was driven by a lot of young graduates that came out. So the lessons kind of 20 years on, when I look back on this kind of side of things, the soil data is still widely used. That's why we're talking about it today, and we've had the physiographics region. When we did that project saved soil survey in New Zealand, and it was very hard to justify why we should spend the money on doing it at the time. If we look back today, in any metric I use, it's a very strong business case for the investment in it. The capability investment in the people I've added up before, 7 of the people who did the bulk of the soil mapping are still operational in the New Zealand industry today as such. 3 of us are in the room here, 2 are in Australia in that sense. That money that was invested in us is still returned to New Zealand, or hopefully if we do something useful. I presume that's what we do. But you're still getting return on that investment in that sense, and that's, to me, is worth a huge amount of money. The original economic development change, well, it was prior to the dairy boom. The dairy boom came through and everything moved through, and it's moved into a totally different focus we didn't see at the time. So that's question mark on that sense. And environmental management, as I just said, it continues to be the main application. But the one thing I did learn about out of that, if you look back at that, the applications may change, but the investment in the good quality data and the platform of that data endures over time, and we can see that in the physiographics units, the stuff that SMAP does, the running of Overseer, all these various things. It still applies. It's still directly applicable, and we've still got a huge return on that investment that was done. So the current challenge that kind of I'm sitting here at the moment in terms of my role at Landcare Research and being responsible for these on a national basis is that these land resource data sets shouldn't be seen as being static. We shouldn't say we did top of climate, done and dusted, we characterise the soil resources of Southland. They can easily disappear. I've got a whole lot of paper records in my office that are now the final prints. They're not available anymore. I can't send them out to people from old soil surveys. So we've put a lot of investment now into digital data sets, whether it's the soil information or whether it's the land cover investment and things like that, to try and keep the data alive over time and keep it relevant. Overseer changes and new tool changes, we can invest and change how we supply information through. One of the major challenges we're facing at the moment is filling the soil water data gap. Those dots that you can see on the map there, those are the locations, the 300 locations in New Zealand that we have measurements of soil water holder capacity, and I don't need to tell anyone in the room how important that information is for our environmental regulation and the decisions that we're making investing on it. Really thin on the ground, the evidence base that we have to do that, and that's what SMAP has got to use on it. And in Southland we've only got 24 sites. So we are investing, we're moving a lot further forward and filling this knowledge gap through direct measurement, using the type of understanding we're getting from the system analysis, this performance on that kind of side of things, and the farm level type understanding. If we look at the Waikiri soil in Southland here, there's 160,000 hectares, roughly 20% of the mapped area, big area in Southland, major soil. SMAP at the moment estimates that's how much water the soil holds if you squeezed all the soil out, and that's how much water it's sitting in there. It's based on one site in that National Soils Database from Southland. The rest of it is derived from elsewhere in New Zealand. Together with Environment Southland and Lisa, she's really much enjoying herself, dug holes, and Landcare, we've been investing in trying to measure more sites, both to give us much greater confidence in this number here, and if it's not right, to try to improve it. And so these are new sites that we've measured and added in over time that we've built up together. And if we run the SMAP models and trying to predict that water for elsewhere and how much water that holds across in the soil across New Zealand, that's what SMAP will predict at the moment, and it's running a bit short there, and so there's improvements we can do in the model. And in particular, what it's missing, I've learnt, is this top 10 centimetres here. We often didn't measure that when we did things previously in the past, so there's a lot more new stuff that would come through. We've got to do that on a lot of the other soils and invest a lot more, so we have a much more solid evidence base behind things. So just to finish off, I suppose I want to leave up the gallery of beauties. I'm not talking about the soils, obviously I'm talking about the soil surveyors there. But no, 20 years ago we found a whole lot of resources in Southland, we characterised them, there's a whole range of them in there. We've still got a huge amount more to learn about their function and their performance and how they behave, their potential going forward. But hopefully you guys enjoy yourself in the next few days on the field trips when you go around and talk to some of the farmers and on how they work on these soils. But yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful suite of soils you've got down here. Cool, thank you.